Good morning, everybody. How are you all? Welcome to the breakfast session. Thanks for coming along. We are delighted this morning to have Neville Bonner Award winner for Indigenous Education. The fourth year in a row we've had the winner of that award. The 2025 winner is Miss Ellie White from Melbourne, University of Melbourne. She's going to talk to us today about advancing cultural advocacy in health education. So a really excellent topic, really interesting topic, and Ellie's here to speak to us about that. Ellie, congratulations on the award. It's fantastic work. Really pleased for you. So before we hand over to Ellie, I'd just like to acknowledge that Adelaide University acknowledges we're meeting on the lands of the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians of the Adelaide Plains. We pay our respects to Kaurna elders, past and present, and recognise their enduring spiritual, cultural, and custodial relationship with this country. We also acknowledge and pay our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples from other nations across Australia who are joining us today. And I'd like to hand over now to Ellie White. Thanks for being there, Ellie.
Thank you for that introduction, Stuart, and good
I will
morning to everyone.
stop sharing and over to you.
Perfect, thank you. I will start sharing. Can you see that okay?
Yes, perfect. Thanks, Ellie.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me nice and bright and early to talk about advancing cultural advocacy in health education. Extending on that acknowledgement that we've just had, I too would like to honour the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm lucky enough to live, work and study on. I pay my respects to elders past and present and thank them for their ongoing care and custodianship of the lands, skies, waterways and all living things. Given we're meeting in an online format here too, also acknowledging the lands on which you're zooming in from today, as well as any other mob that might be joining us here today. Now, whilst I'm incredibly humbled to have the opportunity to share my knowledge here with you today, in truth, I feel like my teaching really isn't that groundbreaking. It's the very thing that my ancestors have been doing for millennia. We prioritise reciprocal knowledge exchange that's built on relationality, adaptability, and respect for each other and the lands. I'm hopeful for a future where celebrating First Nations ways of knowing, being, and doing is simply the norm rather than the exception. A quick note on terminology as well. Throughout this presentation, I'll be using the term First Nations peoples when I'm referring to both Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander individuals, unless I explicitly state otherwise. And this respectfully honours their rich diversity of cultures and experiences amongst our communities. I may also use some colloquial terms like mob or blackfella as well to reference First Nations peoples. And when I'll be quoting, I'll obviously state whatever terminology that person initially used. Importantly, the work that I'll be presenting today isn't mine in isolation. It's all been a big team effort. And as you can see by the extensive list of names here on the slide, I feel really privileged to have such an incredible team to work alongside in this space. This includes numerous First Nations colleagues, which are listed on the left there, as well as our non-Indigenous peers and allies there on the right. So big thank you to all of those of you listed on the slide for making this work possible. As we dive into the heart of our discussion today, let's first reflect on this critical question. If our approaches to teaching First Nations curriculum are working, why do inequities still exist? Clearly, something needs to change and we need to do better. Firstly, let's consider the complexities of the systems that we all work within, and despite often well-intentioned efforts, systemic barriers continue to persist and influence outcomes. Secondly, we need to be critical of our approaches to teaching. Are they truly inclusive and reflective of First Nations perspectives and the needs of the community? By questioning and challenging the status quo, we can begin to identify the urgent work that needs to be done. And today I'll be sharing the processes and learnings to strengthening the University of Melbourne's Doctor of Physiotherapy, or DPT as I'll refer to it throughout, which is the program that I teach into. It's no means the perfect example, far from it, but I do hope that it is helpful for you nonetheless and you can take a thing or two away from it. Today, I'll be starting off with some context of who I am, and then we'll highlight the issues with our prior curricula. And identifying these challenges is essential to, I guess, understand why the change is needed and how we can better elevate First Nations knowledges into our teaching practices. Next, I'll talk you through our course structure, then the guiding principles that underpins all the work we do, the very core of our teaching. We'll also review supportive literature that informs our approaches, grounding our work in established research and theory. We'll then move on to some key learnings, insights that we've gained from trial and error across a few years, and I'll highlight some ongoing gaps that we have continuing within our program, areas that we hope to keep improving upon. Finally, we'll discuss some other recommendations that you can use within your roles in academia, but hopefully also well beyond. By better understanding these elements, we aim to strengthen our curricula and contribute to a more equitable society that truly honours First Nations perspectives. But to understand my work, it's important that you know at least a little bit about me. Firstly, I'm a proud Kija Bardi woman from my father's side and English heritage on my mother's. My mobs come from the Kimberley region of northwestern Australia, right up the top, but I'm born and raised here in Naarm on the beautiful Wurundjeri country. More specifically, this image shows our family's Hunter Creek from a trip I did last year, which is on my grandfather's Bardi country, a couple of hours north of Broome on the Dampier Peninsula, that tiny green little tip there. Whereas this image shows the stunning Pernalulu National Park from the trip as well up on country last year with my parents, and that's from my grandmother's Gidja country. It's over east from Broome, probably like, 10 to 12 hours from Broome, kind of in between Broome and Darwin if you're driving. I'm a physiotherapist and I continue to work clinically in a casual capacity at St Vincent's Hospital in Melbourne across their orthopaedic and emergency wards. I work as a lecturer and lead our First Nations teaching across the 3 years of our DPT program, a course that I graduated from myself in 2019. And like many others here, who might be here with us today, I'm an accidental academic, but feel really blessed to be able to help shape the future of our profession. I'm also currently pursuing my PhD, which focuses on the experiences of First Nations health professionals and the actions that hospitals need to take to better support our recruitment, retention and development. As if that already didn't sound like enough on my plate, I recently also took up some running. Last year I was selected as one of 12 as part of Robert De Costella's Leadership and Health Initiative, the Indigenous Marathon Project. I went from no running to running the New York City Marathon in a little over 6 months with 11 other mob from across the country. It was a life-changing experience, and so much so that I'm training for a further 2 marathons this year. But most importantly, I'm a partner, I'm a daughter, a sister, auntie, and a friend. As mob, relationality is central to our being, and I hope that you can find some sort of connection to one or more parts of my identity. Now that you have a better understanding of the positionality that I bring to this work, let's dive straight into the past issues of our curriculum. Firstly, our course had very little input from First Nations peoples. From my experience as a student, the staff teaching were largely non-Indigenous, and while often seemingly well-intentioned, it lacked direct representation of mob who can share our own stories, knowledges, and ways of working in ways that simply a non-Indigenous academic cannot. In fact, to my knowledge, I was and am the first First Nations person to be employed as anything more than a casual within my department. Secondly, words can influence inclusivity. I had a personal experience with an assessment that assumed my non-Indigeneity. I completed parts A and B, and for part C was asked, and I quote, "How would an Indigenous person perceive/respond to this?" This singular question wanted us to consider First Nations perspectives, disregarding the fact that my entire reflection, parts A, B, and C, were from that very perspective. And this might seem like I'm being quite nitpicky, but in reality, it reinforces stereotypes of education attainment and that the course will and can only consist of non-Indigenous students. Although I was the significant minority in that course, being the only Black fella within my year, I too deserve to experience an inclusive learning environment where my identity was celebrated rather than assumed and denied. Another issue was with a different assessment, which was a discussion board task that another First Nations student in a different year had challenges with. She didn't quite feel comfortable accessing the discussion board task and completing that assessment due to the inappropriate and culturally unsafe discussion that was being shared there by fellow students. Finally, our approaches tended to be deficit focused, highlighting what is lacking rather than celebrating existing strengths. An example of this was the majority of First Nations related content sitting within the subject called chronic disease and disability. This mindset can be discouraging and doesn't honour the richness, beauty and diversity of our cultural backgrounds, nor the many protective factors that exist within our community. I distinctly remember having a non-Indigenous external presenter, a supposed expert, coming to speak to us about, and I quote, the terrible health status of Indigenous people, as if being mob automatically determined my ill health. Take a moment to think about how taxing it might be for a First Nations student to solely learn about our great losses and the harsh reality of consequences of colonisation, often from a non-Indigenous person. It's physically, emotionally, and mentally exhausting. By addressing these issues, we can move forward to a more inclusive and respectful teaching practices, which I'll get onto how we went about this shortly. But before I do, let me give you some context by mapping out our curriculum. Guided by the philosophy, nothing for mob, without mob, our team has led a comprehensive redesign of our First Nations teachings. It introduces a deliberate staggered pathway, scaffolding cultural reflexivity for self in year 1, cultural safety within the clinical context in year 2, and cultural advocacy for broader societal impacts in year 3. This model progressively builds student capability while also aligning with course learning outcomes and hopefully better preparing our graduates to practice as respectful, culturally safe clinicians and advocates within their communities. Now let me talk you through the teaching activities that we do. So in first year, our students participate in Ways of Knowing, which is an interprofessional First Nations health program that includes multiple disciplines. I can't remember the exact amount, but 7 to 10 or so, and it involves 4 activities. It has an independent online learning module, a discipline-specific Billabalaris walk, as is shown on the picture on the slide there, and these sessions use an interactive mobile application with built-in GPS-activated audio. It enables students to learn directly from Wurundjeri elders, which is the country where our Parkville campus is located on. Billabalaris walk explores the shared histories of the campus and encourages truth-telling and student self-reflection. It also includes an online interprofessional tutorial where students hear directly from First Nations patients via recorded videos, which was from a partnership with Royal Melbourne Hospital. And then lastly, there's a panel which consists of 4 to 5 First Nations health professionals. The associated assessment requires students to reflect on their own cultural selves, worldviews, and the cultural and social determinants of health with reference to the impacts of colonisation upon First Nations people's experiences of physiotherapy. And then in response to the culturally unsafe discussion board tasks that I mentioned a little earlier, we led a redevelopment of the associated assessment. Fortunately, we were also able to involve the very student who raised the concerns in the first place, which I'm really proud of. We replaced the discussion board online task with a more inclusive e-portfolio task, which involved staggered entries around facilitated immersive experiences. One was prior to visiting Melbourne Museum's Bunjalaka Aboriginal Cultural Centre, which is a space designed by mob for the community that tells the story of survival against the odds. The students also submit another reflection after their Bunjalaka visit, and then one following a culturally informed yarning circle, which is held outdoors, weather permitting, under the River Red Gums on our Parkville campus, as is shown in that picture on the slide there. These trees obviously predate the establishment of the university and connect with prior learning, as it's a stop of Billabalaris walk that the students visit as part of Ways of Knowing in first year. This assessment helps students gain a deeper understanding of the responsibility of First Nations health professionals when working with mob and how these may relate to First Nations concepts of health and lived experience within the health systems. This innovation has been embraced by students, with 91% recognising learning about First Nations cultures as relevant to them as future physiotherapists. 86% reported the teaching block supported their learning. And more specifically, 91% indicated an improved understanding of cultural safety as a direct result of that teaching block. And 95% valued having the opportunity to learn outside traditional lecture theatres and classrooms. This refreshed approach not only improved engagement and comprehension, but also created spaces that shifted learning from colonial frameworks to celebrating First Nations ways of knowing. This impact is evident with the word cloud on the slide here, which describes it as insightful, eye-opening, informative, valuable, and moving, to name a few. Our third year physio students have two key First Nations learning opportunities that sit within a subject called Integrated Professional Practice B, and that extends First Nations teaching beyond solely profession-based education. It has a large focus on advocacy for broader societal impacts, which is an ongoing commitment. This subject includes an online learning module and a workshop in preparation for Triple R, which is Respect, Reciprocity and Reconciliation panel, which features 3 to 4 First Nations academics, health professionals or community leaders, and 1 non-Indigenous ally, as is shown in that top image on the right there. Additionally, as part of the selected modules, students can opt in to join a multi-day immersive experience where they visit culturally relevant spaces and learn from the local First Nations community members and elders. Previously, this was held interprofessionally on Yorta Yorta country, as is pictured with those other 2 images, and that was developed by Wurruru Health Unit in medicine at the university. Students may reference these experiences and their learnings, as well as any other prior related activities, as key assets to demonstrate advocacy and ethical practice as part of their major assessment linked with that subject. All of these curriculum updates have been guided by the principles of First Nations leadership, cultural integrity, and reconciliation in action. Although it's beneficial for students, both First Nations and non-Indigenous, equally as important, the processes also prioritise the safety and well-being of our First Nations staff. To explain these in a little bit more detail, First Nations leadership prioritises First Nations perspectives at every stage. Contrary to outdated processes, we make decisions for the things that affect us and our people. Through targeted recruitment, we've been able to expand our First Nations teaching team from 3 to 8 members, noting that all other members but myself are currently on casual contracts, but with regular engagement and many across multiple years. This has built capacity, strengthened representation that more accurately demonstrates the diversity of our communities and has led to delivery of more culturally informed teaching practices. Co-facilitated teaching and reciprocity is foundational to the success of our teaching program. It's seen across all the First Nations activities and tutorials across our program. Co-facilitated teaching involves jointly led sessions by both First Nations tutor and a non-Indigenous ally, better modelling the true definition of what reconciliation is. This approach reduces colonial load and offers an opportunity for capacity building for all of those involved. This enhanced staff to student ratio provides a richer, more culturally considered learning environment, one that offers varying perspectives that students are able to connect with. We shift the narratives from colonial constructs to celebrating First Nations ways through driving First Nations cultures and knowledges throughout our entire GPT program. In doing so, we're able to elevate community strengths and challenge stereotypes. Additionally, in response to my own negative experiences, we now prioritise using inclusive language that does not assume non-Indigeneity. This approach challenges the often deficit-based health education system, with local elders consulted to ensure appropriate use of terminology as required. Importantly, education is a collaborative journey rather than a one-sided transaction, and these efforts demonstrate how we value genuine partnerships and sustained engagement with First Nations communities. These principles have capacity to pave the way for a more equitable and culturally responsive future in education, where all voices are heard and valued, and where learning truly reflects the perspectives of those who it impacts most. While acknowledging that scholarly literature reflects a Western approach, my work is primarily shaped by my own traditional Aboriginal ways of knowing, being, and doing, many of which can't fully be captured or experienced through academic papers. That said, at the same time, in recognition of the growing need for university graduates to engage with First Nations curriculum and to develop capacity to work alongside mob and address inequities and create fairer outcomes, as per Page and colleagues in 2019, our teaching practices are grounded in place-based learning, First Nations leadership, and transformative learning opportunities. These are informed not only by key scholarly literature, but more importantly, by the enduring knowledges and practices of our ancestors, of all the First Nations tutors involved in our teaching. For place-based learning, we engage DPT students, most of whom are non-Indigenous, with local First Nations community members, connecting that theoretical knowledge to lived experience, as well as historical and environmental contexts. Burgess in 2022 highlights that such immersive experience that involve being and doing in place facilitate deeper learning beyond the classroom. And further, Yunka Porter and Shillingsworth in 2020 note that culture is not what your hands touch, it's what moves your hands, a principle that we apply by enabling students to learn through First Nations ways of knowing rather than imposed frameworks. Importantly, our work supports Country et al.'s 2015 research, which notions that the relationship we have with country, acknowledge it as knowledgeable and vital. And as you've probably gathered from what I've mentioned in the last 20 minutes or so, we place strong importance on First Nations-led initiatives, which is consistent with the approach outlined by Kennedy and colleagues in 2023. In addition, the integration of diverse First Nations voices and leadership serves to advance efforts towards decolonising our curriculum, as per McLaughlin and Peers in 2007. Our teaching models integration of First Nations knowledges within our curricula through transformative learning. This approach has significant impact, particularly for non-Indigenous students, as noted by Bullen and Peers in 2021. And additionally, according to Hill and co-authors in 2020, such practices foster relational, two-way learning that amplifies First Nations voices among students and colleagues. Here's a quick snapshot of our key learnings across the last few years. Firstly, things take time. Effective work in this space can't be done overnight or rushed in any way, so be sure to plan ahead. Next, everyone is on their own cultural journey, including myself. Be open to learning new ways of working and other perspectives. It's key for growth and for strengthening your impact. Thirdly, prioritise collaboration. Building relationships can be time-consuming, but is arguably the most important part of the process. Reciprocity is essential. You can't just take, and take. First Nations peoples need to be recognised as cultural experts and should be remunerated appropriately. Lastly, be dynamic, as things always change. And like anything, it isn't always smooth sailing, so flexibility is absolutely needed and should be factored into your planning. Resources may also need to be updated to match current views and the needs of the local communities. Now, whilst I'm incredibly proud of the positive changes that we've been able to make and implement across our DPT program over the last few years, gaps continue to remain, and if addressed, would continue to further strengthen our curriculum. First Nations teachings are delivered across the 3 years of our program. However, I would love to see such curriculum further embedded within our more clinical focus subjects. Given elders are the knowledge holders within our communities, it'd be great to see more involvement and elders in our teaching delivery, something that we're working on better incorporating. However, sometimes structural policies and procedures act as barriers, for example, onboarding systems, which are not very accessible for anyone, but particularly older generations, where people are expected to navigate new systems and undertake hours of mandatory training to potentially deliver small bouts of teaching content. Additionally, colonial systems like universities and their remuneration rates, according to EBA academic scales, fail to recognise the value of cultural knowledge. Thirdly, we are exploring ways to further challenge the systems that we work within through our assessment formats. Given First Nations languages are oral, not written, as well as the need for assessments to be more inclusive of neurodiverse learners, in the near future, we hope to develop a multi-method assessment option where, for example, currently all of our related assessments in this space are written, but how powerful could it be to let students self-determine what's most appropriate for their submission approach? It could be written as it currently is, it could be a self-recorded video, or even something like a yarn with me, which would offer an opportunity to actually connect with students, not just that transactional exchange between a submitted assignment and a marker. Logistically, we're still figuring out what this might actually look like and how we could apply equitable marking for it. But historically speaking, rubrics weren't a thing that us blackfellas used. I often tell students that being Aboriginal isn't a switch that I just flick off when I leave work for the day, and I expect the same of allies. It's a continual role and something that you should carry with you wherever you go. As such, I've included a few tips that might be helpful for some of you that can be used both within work but also outside. Firstly, do your own research. There are so many great resources out there. It's not our responsibility to teach you. Secondly, support First Nations businesses. The social determinants of health model demonstrates just how important finances can be. Whether you're organising catering, purchasing gifts, or even purchasing toilet paper, there are literally endless amounts of First Nations businesses that you can support. Visibility is a big thing as well. So consider ways that you can support mob without actually having to use your own words. For example, following the referendum result a few years back, I found strength in being able to identify advocates within our community by the clothes that they chose to wear, things like an always was, always will be tee, because you never know who's watching and the possible impact it might have of small acts like that. People often tell me that they're so afraid of saying the wrong thing that they choose to just not say anything at all, but know that mistakes are okay. And that brings us to the third point there on the slide. We don't expect you to get it right every time, but you do need to try and be respectful when you do. We're proud people, so talk to us about culture, but not in an overbearing manner or a judgmental way if someone doesn't want to engage or perhaps they don't know much about their own culture. That's the impact of colonisation. And if it brings you any comfort, I too make mistakes. Next, know the country that you live and work on and honour it. It's important to elevate First Nations voices, create space and amplify them, particularly in academia where we are so significantly underrepresented. I also encourage you to get out there and engage with your local First Nations community and to learn about the local priorities. 6, you've got privilege and bias, you need to acknowledge it. These are unavoidable and it's not about making you feel guilty about having them, but more so recognising the positionality that you bring to every interaction that you have. I acknowledge my privilege in having a university education, a stable job, and a roof over my head. And unfortunately, that's not the same for everyone. When you hear inappropriate comments or see inappropriate behaviour, call it out. Sometimes things are offensive, and I choose not to actually react in that case because one, it's not safe for me to do so, or two, I'm sick of having to be the one to speak up because it's exhausting. The power of sharing that load is massive. And lastly, consider us and our cultures throughout the entire year, not just when NAIDOC Week and National Reconciliation Week roll around. Celebrate our community strengths and our wins with us and stand with us when injustices occur. That's all I've got prepared today, but I do thank you for joining on and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ellie. That was so interesting, and it's some fantastic tips there that I think everyone can really take away. That was, yeah, a lot to think about. Thank you so much. So we have a question, and everybody, if you have a question for Ellie, please, and there's a lot of love in the room I see there for you, Ellie. If you have a question, please post it in the Q&A or in the chat window. So we have a question from Lisa. Are you there, Lisa? You can ask Ellie directly.
Sure. Thanks, Ellie. That was a really interesting presentation, and I think there's more than just one little takeaway that I can um, let sit with me to think about how to apply. I'm as I was typing the question, just as I had hit enter, you got to that future work point around assessment. And so my question is actually around assessment and how your process or to date, and acknowledging as you said that there's work to be done in that space, but to date the way you have designed curriculum and worked across those 3 years, what's the process been like, and who and how have you worked to map those learning activities to assessment items, acknowledging the constraints of the university system? Like, we've got semesters, we've got, whether we need to provide rubrics, as you say, you can only give students so many assessment items. What was I'd love to hear your reflections and that your learnings and process around that to date.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa. It's not always easy work. It's quite challenging, and you're constantly having to advocate and make a case for, I guess, challenging that status quo within academia settings. As you've seen on the slides, I'm really fortunate to have an incredible group of people that I get to work alongside. I sit within a team, it's called First Nations Health Promotion Equity Team. I'm the only First Nations person within that team, but I do have a boss who is a great ally and lets me lead in that space. As part of that, we obviously have a lot of casual staff that help guide our assessments. So when we do like an assessment refresh, we kind of do a call out and see who's interested in helping reframe that. So it's not just my own perspectives informing what the changes might be, but more broadly incorporating more perspectives, because of course I don't speak on behalf of all First Nations peoples, and we, like any other community, have varying perspectives within our own communities and our workplaces and different things as well. So getting more people involved is key, I think. And then in terms of some of the other processes, we've had issues with rubrics before. It's a difficult space to mark because we often intentionally try to keep things a bit vague. So we're not giving students too much information about the specifics of what they want. And often they do want you to hold their hand and be like, I want you to include almost this sentence and this. So when we do try to keep it vague, we've had a bit of a pushback and had to be a little bit more strict with our rubric. But I think we're at the point now where we've built assessments up and we're going to push back and try and shake things up a little bit, because I'd love to do an assessment with no rubric or it to look a bit different, but I don't know how that would look yet. But if anyone else has any ideas from the context that they work within, I'd be really keen to hear how they've been implemented elsewhere.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Ellie.
An assessment without a rubric. Who would do such a thing? Crazy. There's a question from Marion. Are you there, Mary?
Yes, I am here.
Go ahead,
Sorry.
Mary.
It was a great presentation. Thank you so much, Ellie. It's very inspiring. I've been working alongside working alongside Indigenous colleagues at my uni. I just wondered if you had any advice on how to advocate up for the sort of resourcing that's needed to support First Nations knowledge holders being involved in the teaching, like as you've described. In the position I'm in, I think that's one of the really challenging parts, is sort of advocating for the value as you described and the remuneration that's really needed, and the acknowledgement of that quality of input into our curriculum that needs to be remunerated accordingly.
Mm-hmm. And like I said earlier, we're not the perfect example. We're still working through these same issues that I think are felt across every other university within the country. But in terms of how we've kind of built up our teaching team over time, so I started a few years back, and kind of since then it's been a bit of like a snowball effect. And like many communities, but I guess particularly working with mob, trust is essential, but a lot of communication works through word of mouth. So it's kind of been like, I've known someone and then that person has been engaged for some time and then they've been like, oh, you should reach out to this person. So it's kind of just grown and grown and grown over time. But I guess it's just making that first step initially, and placing the importance of it, I guess putting a case forward about, and you can refer to the literature that you need First Nations peoples involved in the teaching. It's not going to be as effective if you don't, because to teach this curriculum, like I mentioned, you need to have mob involved and leading in these spaces. So I don't know, I guess you just need to make that first step, and then once that happens, it does kind of snowball a bit. But I, at our university, would love to see more First Nations peoples employed within our department in more of a fixed term or permanent capacity, and also teaching across different spaces that aren't solely First Nations, because yes, we're First Nations peoples, but it's not the sole parts of our identity, and there's so many other spaces that we can contribute to, whether it's clinical physiotherapy or the research space. There's endless possibilities.
Thank
That probably
you.
doesn't
That's
answer the
really
question,
helpful.
but hopefully
No,
gives
it
you a few
does.
things to think about.
Yeah, no, thank you. I took something away from that. No worries. Thanks. See you.
Awesome. Thanks, Marion.
Thanks, Marion. There is a question from Jennifer Yates. Are you there, Jennifer?
Yes, I am.
Please go ahead.
Thanks so much, Ellie, for your inspiring presentation. I was madly trying to write down and take my own notes during that. So forgive me if I've got on the wrong end of the stick of this question. I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the wonderful GPS app that you have for the second year students for their on-country experience, where I believe you have the elders storytelling as they go through on-country.
Yes, we do. That teaching actually sits in our first year, and it's an interprofessional program that sits within our collaborative practice unit. So we kind of lead it and organise it, but in terms of being an expert of what it looks like, I'm probably not the best person to speak to. But it's essentially, it's called Bilbalari's Walk, and there's, I think, maybe like 12 different stops around the university campus. Thanks to Dave for putting the link in the chat there for more information. And it's an app that's specific to our campus. And when you're walking around to different stops, you've got your headphones in. And as you get closer to that stop, it will automatically start telling the stories of these Wurundjeri elders about what the significance of that particular space is, which explores how things have changed through colonisation, but also really beautifully reflects on the history of the campus before the establishment of the university. And that was made within faculty of medicine, dentistry and health sciences. Actually, don't quote me on that. I'm not actually sure where it was made, but it's been running for a few years, and there's been a lot of First Nations academics that have been really pivotal in that work, which was before I came to work at the university. Oh, thank you, Fiona.
Thanks, Ellie. We'll see if we can develop one of those on our campus as well. That'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Would just involve, obviously, really solid engagement over time with the local community that you're working within.
Fantastic idea. Naomi Milgate, are you out there, Naomi?
Yes, I am. Thanks, Stuart, and thanks, Ellie. It's great to hear how you've been incorporating Indigenous knowledge and cultural practices through your degrees. We do have some framework to try and indigenize some curriculum for us throughout CQU here. However, one thing that our educators are really struggling with is how to do that and how to connect with our local Indigenous people. But not only that, connecting with people within their industry to bring in to help, particularly where there aren't, and I've said in my comment, visible Indigenous people. Like obviously, not everyone like publicly identifies as Indigenous and things like that, and they may also be more junior in level in those sort of industries and things like that. So any tips about how I'm an educational developer, so we quite often have people come to us and say, how do we do this and that sort of thing. What sort of ideas and thoughts can I give to them about how to reach out, particularly in a university like ours, which is so broad in where we come from and things like that. There's always the difficulty of, do we base it around our main campus in Rockhampton, or do we try and represent all of our campuses, particularly with students online and things like that? Like, any tips on how we can help support educators in doing that?
That is a great question. I'll start off by, I guess, explaining a little bit about ours. So we're obviously based on Wurundjeri country, but none of our people within our teaching team are actually Wurundjeri people. It'd be awesome to have some people involved, but I guess would recommend not restricting it to that for the moment, because I think it's also about having diverse perspectives. And then when I think about our students, when they're out working, they're not just going to be working here in Wurundjeri, but they'll be spreading out all over the country, and some of them even overseas as well. And then I guess thinking about how you're getting the word out about potential job opportunities that might be available. So obviously doing it through university systems and Seek and things, but also considering First Nations contexts as well. So things like Koori Mail, or reaching out to particular newsletters like In Health. You could reach out to Lowitja, or you could reach out to Oka Network, because that's got a list of First Nations peoples that are relevant to that space. So that's a really good way to get things out. But otherwise, I think just trying not to be so focused on the destination, but more the process around getting out there and meeting the community. Because once you're out there and like going to things like the NAIDOC March or different rallies or markets as they pop up, because you're just going to meet people, and then it's just going to spread, and you might hear of someone that might be interested or works in a similar space. And I guess the last thing would be having, again, not being so restrictive, because in terms of physio, our teaching pool, we don't solely have physiotherapists that teach our content, because a lot of our stuff isn't profession specific. So we have like a nurse, we have a midwife, we do have physios, of course, as well. But valuing those different perspectives, I think, is a strength, and it brings those different aspects, because everyone's going to have different experiences when they work in the clinical roles, to bring to the teaching that we share with students.
Awesome. Thanks. Some great
Thanks,
ideas.
Naomi.
Thanks, Naomi. Okay, we have a question from Rosalind Donlan Fernandez. Are you there, Rosalind? Rosalind may have departed. She says, further to the question regarding assessment without a rubric, I'd be interested to know, Ellie, if you have any assessment components in your curriculum or course that are oral assessments or Vivas, as contrasted with written work.
There would be within our curriculum. There's lots of different methods that students might be able to submit with assessments. They do a lot of like group presentations and different things, but not in terms of when we're assessing their understanding of First Nations knowledge. Is Fiona's our head of department, and she's saying more across the curriculum than I am.
You do have
yes, there's a
for
Viva
IPPB.
for
Yeah.
IPPB, which is that third year subject that I mentioned, where there's the panel and the opportunity to have further on-country experiences.
Thank you, Ellie, and I'm sorry.
Oh, there's Rosalind.
Yes, I'm sorry, Stuart. I was just having a
No worries, Rosalind. I should have given you another moment to log in, but I jumped the gun there. Sorry about that.
No, not a problem at all. Yeah. Thanks, Ellie, for a really inspiring presentation. I guess my question comes from a place of when you're working within an organisation that's very supportive of much of what you've presented, but there are still challenges to bringing in innovation, particularly around the way things are done within, I guess, the university structure in terms of assessment for students. And a lot of assessment across the health professions, I think, is written. It's heavily focused on written material. And there are, well, at least in my context, there's many ways of knowing, and there's many ways of assessing knowledge that are at a greater depth sometimes than what we offer through our sort of more traditional assessment modalities, but yet trying to get that implemented creatively and rigorously is a challenge, because space is one where I think there's lots of potential for that. And I would be interested in your reflection about that, which is why I asked the question.
Thank you for that, Rosalind. Did you get to hear the vague answer that I provided?
Yes, I did actually. And,
yes.
and you referred to other people in the curriculum, and I fully appreciate that, because yes, it takes a village. There's a whole team of people working on these things, but sometimes you just seem to hit the same blocks, wherever, in different sort of structural settings around getting some change in those areas. So yeah, I wondered if you had any insights or strategic tips that you could share.
I completely agree that there is a need for different assessment formats, and I really love the option for students to select what I guess aligns best with their learning and what they need and how they can best demonstrate their knowledge, whether that's written potentially, or whether it's a video or a presentation or any other way. And I really like the idea of the opportunity to, in this space, be able to have a yarn with a First Nations person. What that would look like is tricky, because how that would sit with staffing and timing, and again, how you would have equity across the marking process. I'm mindful of that there's only one of me in the university, and there's so much that we want to do, but I guess it's just picking little bits and pieces of what we can work on while I'm trying to juggle all the other stuff that I'm doing as well. I think also in a time of so much change around AI as well, that would be a really interesting space. And just being able to have that genuine connection with students. We're hoping to do a little bit more work on that later this year, and hopefully get a little working group together to see and shape what that could look like. But still a very much work in progress there.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
So we have a question from Naomi. You still there, Naomi?
Yes, I am. Thanks. Thank you so much, Ellie. I'm really interested in how you have been working with your second years, particularly in that translation, I guess, of their understanding from first year into how they're applying that in their clinical learning as second year students. And I guess given particularly in physio with our the recent change to our I guess the pillars of what our practice is based on, and having cultural safety as one of those pillars. I'm wondering how you're going about assessing cultural safety.
Cultural safety is a difficult one to assess, because it's obviously determined by the recipient of the care.
Yes.
So I could be a patient and I could deem an interaction culturally safe, but you could do the literal same thing to another First Nations patient and they could deem it culturally unsafe. So it is really hard to assess, but I guess looking at the principles and the strategies that students are trying to implement. So within that second year teaching, where we're shifting more from, I guess, the basic cultural awareness and an introduction, acknowledging that everyone's coming in with a different journey prior to that point in their undergraduate degrees, but also, of course, their personal lives. So for some, it might be quite basic and some might be advanced. And of course, we could have First Nations students who are living and breathing this every day. But in terms of what we do with that assessment refresh, we involved a case study to be able to, I guess, assess and have something that students can refer back to. And that case was really intentionally designed to be strength-based and to challenge stereotypes. From my own experiences and from what I hear, a lot of case studies are more around like the typical things of chronic disease, or it's like a diabetes or a cancer from lifestyle behaviours which are a reality, but I guess it's not the whole picture, acknowledging that some things just happen to people as well in hospitals that you'll see, or clinics or wherever else, that isn't from lifestyle related choices. And of course, it doesn't really acknowledge the impact of colonisation often that impacts into those lifestyle choices as well. So this case is Gavin. He is, I don't know, he's a 40 to 50-year-old man, and he was in a car accident that wasn't his fault, and he needed an amputation. So it's not, it's obviously a traumatic case, but it's, I guess, challenging the way that a lot of other cases work. So the students connect back to that and talk about Gavin as an example throughout this 3 kind of staggered entries. And it's really beautiful to look back on reflections and even the students to acknowledge how far their learning has grown since they reflected a few weeks ago, and then they've had these kind of 2 further cultural immersion activities. That's probably the main thing.
Okay, thank you. So the reflection on that case study is around the cultural immersion activities that you're doing.
Yeah, so they do one before they go to Melbourne Museum, the Aboriginal Cultural Centre. They go through the exhibition space itself, and then there's a garden, and then there's like an audio exhibition in the forest garden there. That we're super lucky in acknowledging that not everyone will have incredible spaces like that to be able to access in their backyard, essentially. And then we have a yarning circle, which is like a debrief session, and just prompting students to bring it back to their clinical practice. Like, why is this important? Why have we walked within the museum? What has this changed for you? They're a really casual and session that just flows. We do have a few prompting questions that we use for them, but you'll often find that students are just bouncing off each other, and they're one of my favourite sessions to be a part of.
Thanks, Ellie.
Thanks, Ellie and Naomi. Okay, everybody. I think we've given Ellie enough questions. She's going to be exhausted for the rest of the day. So thank you so much, Ellie. That was really a fantastic presentation. If everyone could show their appreciation to Ellie. Ellie's clearly an amazing academic, and you're going to go far. So we hope to hear from you again sometime, Ellie, about as your work progresses through the years. So thank you so much. We really appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for being here this morning. Again, thanks to Ellie, Neville Bonner Award winner, AAUT 2025. I'm sure we'll be hearing from her again. So thanks, everybody. Have a fantastic day, and see you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah.